What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you some first impressions for Avernum 3 Ruined World, which is a remake of Avernum 3, which released back in 2018, with the original version, Exile 3, being released all the way back in 1997. Now, this is, as always, one of those classic CRPG series I've been meaning to get around to, and in this case, because Avernum 4 is meant to be out later this year, a remake of it, I should say. And I've already cleared out Avernum 1 and 2 to get ready for that, but probably also worth a mention that of the 6 Avernum games, they are divided up into 2 trilogies. To that end, with us discussing the final entry in the original trilogy here, it's pretty much impossible to talk about this without actually kind of referencing events of the previous games, especially since what Avernum 3 is all about is what you've been building up to in the previous 2 games. You see, in the original Avernum, you get cast into Avernum, as it's called, which is a series of underground cavernous networks that all of the undesirables were thrown into, except they all bounded together, founded an empire of their own down here, and ultimately went to war with the surface, won that war, which was the subject of the second game, and now we are finally in Avernum 3 here, headed up to the surface ourselves to see what's going on up there and to hopefully try to establish a foothold from which the people of Avernum can rejoin the surface. And so far, having really enjoyed the writing of the first 2 games, I'm excited to see where that goes in this final entry, but obviously I haven't gotten that far yet. However, as with all of Spiderweb Software games, they are very similar from entry to entry, as it is a very small outfit, basically Jeff Vogel and his wife. So while each entry brings an entirely new story and content, mind you, the mechanics don't really change much from game to game, with the sort of big feature that is supposed to be in this one primarily taking the form of a world that can change in response to ongoing plagues when you get to the surface. There are a couple of monster plagues, and if you don't do anything about them, or take your time or whatever, certain towns are meant to be destroyed and whatnot. And that can be seen in the previous 2 entries with 1 or 2 towns here and there, but from what I understand it happens in this one on a bigger scale. The drawback to that, from what I understand, being that a lot of the towns can be a little cookie cutter as a result because they are kind of meant to be destroyable. So when I wind up reviewing the full game, I think that will be, of course, a kind of focal point of how interesting that mechanic winds up being. But otherwise, it is very familiar to all of the other Avernum games if you've played 1 or 2 or even any other Spiderweb Software game. However, just from a remake perspective, this one is a little easier to probably interact with because the UI is a little more modern, as this particular remake for them was where they were starting to get into the more modern day, with big updates to their engine being more readily apparent, I would say. Straight away with things like the just UI interface being a little more polished and interactable, though fundamentally also hasn't changed either, mechanically at least, in terms of the layout and where everything is, but it is cleaner and easier to navigate at the very least. Now, the other sort of catch to that, though, something I've experienced as I've been going through this original trilogy, is that they weren't exactly made with things like a 4K monitor in mind, and so all 3 of these original Avernum games I have had to have some varying degree of work involved in terms of getting it to actually fill up the entire screen on my 4K monitor. Now, bizarrely, the second game, for whatever reason, wound up being the most of a hassle here. So, having kind of expected it going into Avernum 3, I knew more or less what to do. However, for Avernum 1 and Avernum 3, all I really had to do was throw the game into 1080 and adjust a setting, and voila, it was totally fine. But for whatever reason, Avernum 2, I really struggled to get it to actually stretch to the whole screen. Not exactly sure what that was about, just thought it was worth mentioning as a novelty, if nothing else. But outside of those things even, one thing that did actually catch me a little bit off guard with Avernum 3 here is that I did not realize that such a big chunk of the underworld via Avernum was going to be available, because they actually start you out as a sort of Act 1 with an explorable portion of the underground caverns called Upper Avernum, now that they've established a path to the surface more reliably that you can explore and get your footing. And in fact, that's what they recommend you do by jumping in and taking out a goblin camp first thing, as well as some bandits, and completing a few quests to get your gear and your sort of initial setup sorted out before you actually head up to the surface, which I thought was kind of fun. Honestly, I just didn't realize that it was going to be so extensive, because even with a little bit of exploring, you can find out that there's a path down further into the caverns as well, so apparently there's going to be a lot more cavern exploration than I initially realized. Though, in fairness, I do recall people telling me that this one was much larger in terms of scale, but at the same time felt a bit empty because of the way the plague system works, so I suppose I'll wind up seeing if that rings true for me in the end. But as a first impression, I can pretty much right away tell kind of where people might have gotten that from, at the very least. And as a bit of a zoomed-out, broad strokes take, I would say it looks to me, first impressions-wise, like Avernum 3 is going to be more of the same, mechanically speaking, with just one or two little things here and there, like UI updates, and more subtle improvements while also bringing this story to a close. So probably nothing earth-shattering in that regard, but having enjoyed a great deal of Jeff Vogel's writing for this and the Geneforge series, I think what I want most out of this experience, more than anything else, is really just seeing how this chapter of the Avernum series winds up ending. And I think if the story beats nail it, then the rest of it will probably be okay, as I've enjoyed the things like the combat system well enough over the course of the series. But one of the nice things about the combat largely staying the same throughout the series is that once you get an idea of a build that works all the way from the first entry even, you can pretty much carry that forward, which makes me feel a lot more comfortable just jumping straight into making my own custom party and approaches and things. I will say, though, I was a little disappointed not to see the alien race from the second game be added as playable, because from the first to second game, they added the Nephilim, the cat people, and the Slith, the lizard people, as playable races who had their own like racial bonuses and stuff, and then the second game introduced the Vanitai, this sort of alien race that also lived in the caverns, and while they are movable units and things, it doesn't look like they'll be joining us on our journey, which I suppose is fair enough given that they're supposed to live in the caves, but I was kind of hoping they would be playable. Otherwise, this game mostly just seems to be more Avernum, and that's hardly a bad thing given how much I've enjoyed the first two entries. So, in terms of when you can expect a proper review for this one, it will be a little while. I just had some extra time, so I wanted to make sure I could get this installed and up and running properly and get it all working accordingly and whatnot, but it is definitely going to get interrupted. I'm in the middle of clearing out a few odds and ends on my schedule, DLCs, things like that, and then as soon as I finish that up, we're going to start actually seeing game releases again, starting with the System Shock 2 remaster on the 26th of this month, so a little under 10 days there. Which is to say, I have no idea when the review for this one will be ready, but it is something I will be working on, so with any luck, sometime in July. But otherwise, that's pretty much going to do it for this particular video. I certainly hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all the YouTube jazz. Let me know how you feel about this, or just Avernum 3 in general, down in the comment section below. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom, and have an amazing day.